The only way to get ourselves out of the problems that we find ourselves in is to start thinking clearly, intelligently, rationally, with a sense of real perspective, proper proportion of values, and clear-sighted mentality, proper attitude. And that's what's lacking. Those things are what's lacking. If they weren't lacking, there would be no need to be starting such a political party. If the political parties we had were doing the best job they could possibly do, and everything was going great, there would be no need to try to create something better. But there's not only a need, but it's such a desperately obvious need that there's no reason to even waste any time trying to question the validity of trying to do it. The only thing to question is the validity of not doing it. It's about time. We've got the tools technologically with the internet, with YouTube, with Wikipedia and Google and all the tools that we have to be able to reach each other immediately. You know, when you think about historically what it used to take to reach people. People had to send letters, and how long it would take for those letters to travel by horse-drawn carriages in the old days, or by boat. And even in the 20th century, it took a certain number of days for letters to travel by car and truck. And now, you don't have to do any of that. You don't have to send postage. You don't have to have a mailman coming to your door. All you have to do is get on your computer. You could be in your bedroom. You could be in your underwear. You could be stark naked. You can write letters to just about anybody anywhere on the planet, and they arrive in a split second. So, despite how bad things continue to seem to spiral down socially, technologically, we've got greater tools than we ever had before. And thus, as Charles Dickens said nearly 2 centuries ago, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. It was the worst of times and it was the best of times. Socially, ecologically, we are in the worst time ever. With the possible exception of the perhaps couple years of nighttime from the comets, when the comets came and killed the dinosaurs, and there might have been a couple years where the atmosphere was all filled with black dust raised by comets hitting the Earth and killing off a lot of the planet's species. But other than that, it's probably the worst right now. It's probably the worst ecological time that's ever been up till now. And unfortunately, things are possibly better now ecologically than they ever will be again. It's up to us. It's up to us to actually take positive action to make sure that that we don't continue on a downward spiral towards global death, and that we can try to do everything we can to make the world a place that's flourishing with life, that's sustaining life, and that's sustaining the great diversity of life which natural evolution gave to us, gave to what we call our forefathers, 4 centuries ago, in the year 1612. If you could go back in time to the year 1612 and see what the United States of America looked like then compared to what it looks like now. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the numbers of animals and wildlife, huge herds of buffalo, huge flocks of birds everywhere you went? The passenger pigeons were supposedly so thick that they would blacken the sky when they flew by because there were just so many of them. And now there may be one stuffed example of a passenger pigeon because people made them extinct by shooting them because they said, oh, there's so many of them, there'll never be a problem. And they went and they shot the passenger pigeons, to the point of death. And I'm sure that it wasn't just shooting them, but it was also the destruction of the natural environment, the cutting down of the forest where they must have, wherever it was that they built their nests. And what we've done to this country in 400 years, it's incredible. But we do have the option, if we can maintain some kind of a balanced, positive attitude and concept of what the world ought to be, that we might be able to try, if not to undo the damage that we've done so far, at least to try not to escalate the amount of damage that we continue to do in the future. But we're headed in the way we are in the society, we're headed in the direction of ignorance, where the mentality of the people who want to keep their heads in the sand and deny that there's any problem at all seems to be dominating the social policies in our society. Is that what you want? Do you want that to continue? Because if so, you can get the fuck out of here. You can go join the Republican Party. You can go join the Democrats. You can go join the Tea Party or the Libertarians. There's lots of choices for you if that's your mentality, if that's what you're comfortable with the future being. But if not, then what are your options? If you're not comfortable with a future where the life on this planet is facing extinction on every continent and in every ocean, and species are going extinct every day, every hour of every day, possibly every minute of every day, another species loses its last member because of what we're doing to destroy this planet. Are you comfortable with that? Are you happy with that? Does that not bother you? Do you shrug that off and say that's okay? Well, then there are political parties for you. Boy, are there ever political parties for you. Go join the Tea Party morons. Go join the Republicans, Libertarians, and the fucking Democrats with their phoniness, their phony charade of caring. See, that's the problem with the Democrats. They've got this phony, they put on this pantomime. The Democrats and the Republicans are two sides of the same coin. They're Tweedledum and Tweedledee, and they're hardly distinguishable from each other, but they play at being opposites. They play at being yin and yang from each other, but they're not. And basically, the Republican Party is overt, and the Democratic Party the Republican Party is overtly ignorant and aggressive, and the Democratic Party is covertly ignorant and aggressive, and they're two sides of the same fucking coin. And the difference is that the Democratic Party puts on this pantomime of being sensitive and caring and interested and intellectual and concerned, and it's all just fucking tokenary bullshit. When it comes right down to it, the Democrats aren't fundamentally any different from the Republicans, but they put on a they just put on a different show. And it's like two masks. It's like the two theater masks, the comedy mask and the tragedy mask. And basically, the Democrats and the Republicans could just stand on the same stage and exchange the masks and each play the other part. It's just like two actors playing the two different parts, but the actors are essentially the same under the masks. Of course, if this sort of talk bothers you, if you disagree, if you feel offended by it, well, you don't even have to be wasting your time listening to this, do you? If that's your opinion, then you've obviously got your alignment settled in your mind, that you feel comfortable being a registered Republican or a registered Democrat and continuing the same charade, the same Yankees versus Red Sox perennial two-party competition game. You feel comfortable with that, so why are you even wasting your time listening to this? But if you're not comfortable with it, as I'm not comfortable with it, then what are you going to do about it? Are you going to shrug your shoulders, hang your head, and give up in despair and say, what's the use? There's nothing you can do. You're outnumbered. You're outpowered. There's just no point. It's all futile. Resistance is futile, and you'll be assimilated. There's no point. Now, if you've read George Orwell's 1984, this is essentially how the book ended, with the protagonist, Winston Smith. In the end of the book, he came to the conclusion that there was really no way, there was no way in hell that he could stand alone against the Big Brother's government that ruled the society he lived in. There was no way he could stand alone against it. There was no way he could defeat it or really make the slightest dent in it. And the only thing he was going to do was exhaust his own mental energy by even trying. And he said, what's the use? And he had to, and resigned himself to it. He said, I'm just going to give up and give in, and I'm going to allow myself to be assimilated because resistance is futile. And the end of the last line of 1984 is he realized he loved Big Brother. That was the end of the book. And you think, well, that's a depressing ending, huh? But isn't it a realistic ending? Isn't it a lot more realistic than trying to make some super hopeful ending where he decided he was going to go on and fight with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star? That Don Quixote, Man of La Mancha mentality, is that realistic? No. Look at your life. Look at the society you live in. Look at everybody you know. How do people, actual people, not characters in books, but actual living people in the society, actually react to the situation? Essentially the way Winston Smith did, saying what can you do about it? You're just one person. You're only going to exhaust all of your own emotional and physical energy. And for what? You're only going to risk your own personal physical safety and your financial security. If you get locked up, if you get your assets taken away from you, and what's the point? At least if you have a roof over your head and you have food to put into your mouth, it may not be great food, but if at least it is food and it's not poison, isn't that in a sense better than fighting an unwinnable fight, a lost cause? Isn't that how you feel? And isn't that the reason why many millions of us resign themselves and say, well, there's nothing you can do except try to vote for the lesser of two evils? And that's a self-perpetuating type of mentality that only serves to support Tweedledum and Tweedledee. That mentality only works in the favor of the Democrats and Republicans by saying, well, there's only two realistic options. There's only two parties that have any realistic chance of doing anything, so if you're going to have any effect on the society, on the politics of our society, of our government, you're forced to choose the lesser of two evils, because at least then there might be the slimmest shadow of a hope that you actually had some minute, minuscule, atomic, quantum level of influence on the government by choosing the lesser of two evils, by voting against the worst candidate of the two. That's the mentality. It's a mentality of resignation. And it only works to the advantage of the Democrats and Republicans. They love the fact that you give up in that manner. But on the other hand, if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to hang your head and shrug it off and say, I resign myself to living in a world that I can have no control over, if somewhere in your childhood was planting the notion that maybe the words such as freedom and individual liberty aren't necessarily just empty, hollow phrases. Maybe there really is a point in spending your lives hoping that somehow and eventually you can find that you live in a world where there really is such a thing as individual personal freedom, where people are free to be human beings and not robots and not slaves. And if you feel the tugging of that somewhere in your subconscious, you're probably not going to be all that satisfied, resigning yourself to this lesser of two evils fate. So what's your choice then? Well, there are a bunch of smaller minority parties out there. How big are they? Some of them have a few million members. You may find there's a Green Party or a Libertarian Party. And there's others that have maybe 500,000 members or 100,000 members. Many of them are started by certain particular ambitious